Our reading this morning is a poem by James Pearson called One Good Wind. It's October, so yes, the world is dying. But I always think I have another month at least, maybe two, to marvel in the middle of fall's kaleidoscope, walking this fractal trance of kindergarten yellows and somehow iridescent pinks. But then, one good wind comes in off the distant Pacific, and trees that just yesterday dripped with dazzle stand skeletal, stripped of their abundance for the promiseless months to come. I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't save up your praise. Luxuriate fully in what you love, because the winds come quickly and the winter is long. The other day I had lunch with a friend whose mother suffers from a degenerative disease, a disease that will soon leave her incapacitated. My friend had just returned from a visit to her mom's doctor to discuss her course of treatment. The doctor recently offered her mom a spot in a clinical trial, an experimental treatment that in the best case might slow, not stop, the disease's progression, but that came at a cost: regular hospital visits, frequent invasive procedures. When my friend and her mother arrived at the office, the doctor immediately handed her the papers to sign to authorize treatment. He was eager to get started. He seemed taken aback then when my friend's mom politely informed him that she decided not to go forward with the trial. When he pushed her on it, when he asked her, "Why wouldn't you do this?" she said to him, in the presence of her daughter, "Doctor, I've lived a long life, a good life, for which I'm so grateful. I'm at peace now. Truly, I'm not afraid to die." My friend recounted this story with tears in her eyes. This business of letting go of our loved ones, of our own life, is so hard, so often filled with fear and anxiety. What a gift for a child to know that their parent is facing the end of life with a sense of peace. As someone who in recent months has accompanied my own parents to similar doctor's appointments, I found myself listening in tears too. But it wasn't only her mother's sense of peace that moved me. Part of it was witnessing another human being, a mortal like me, claim the incredible freedom and power that comes with not fearing death. "Doctor, I'm not afraid to die." It reminded me of something that the poet and activist Audre Lorde once wrote about her own battle with cancer. She said, "After we have dealt face to face with death, what's left for us to be afraid of? Once I accept dying as a part of life, who can ever have power over me again?" I aspire to this fearlessness. And I've often wondered, how do we live with a sense of peace and equanimity in the face of mortality? How can we come to terms with death in a way that allows us to claim that strength and freedom that these two women bear witness to? And my search for answers to these questions has led me to conclude that for many years I had been just approaching this question of death all wrong. You see, in my mind, I'd often thought of death not only as the cessation of life, right? The absence of life, but also the opposite of life. Something wholly other than life, foreign to it. And what I've discovered over the years is that this framing of death as other has only heightened my fear of dying, turned it into a boogeyman, a looming, shadowy unknown. Maybe you've sometimes thought of death this way too. What I've come to believe over time is that perhaps death isn't the stranger I thought it was. Not a stranger to life, but a friend. And maybe we're more familiar with death than we'd suspected. Maybe, as Joni Mitchell suggests, we have already seen life from both sides now. From both sides of the border of life and death. In fact, maybe there's a sense in which we've been dying all our lives without even knowing it. What in the world do I mean by that? The great Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron has written, "To live is to be willing to die over and over again." To live is to be willing to die over and over again. I think what she means by this is that life, properly understood, our life, is a constant process of change and flux. We might think of ourselves as fixed and constant, but really our self is always fluid and changing. To use a Buddhist term, impermanent. And the change in our lives doesn't just mean accepting and embracing the new. It's as much about letting go of the old. It's shedding old skins and selves. In other words, change isn't just a process of addition and accretion. It's also a practice of subtraction. We lose things along the way. We know this, don't we? We lose relationships. We lose people we love. We lose a job or a career. We lose our way in life. We let go of hopes and dreams. We relinquish once cherished self-understandings and identities. And what Chodron and I are suggesting is that we can think of each of these losses as a kind of death, right? The death of something we cherished, the death of a part of ourselves, a death that, yes, makes space for new life and change, but still a death. To live is to be willing to die over and over again. But maybe this isn't how we were taught to think about our lives. What we sometimes do is take all the changes of our lives, the twists and turns, the stumbles and the setbacks, the deaths, large and small, and we kind of stitch them together into a coherent story about how we got to where we are today. And looking back on that story, it can seem as if it were all inevitable, just one straight path. But it didn't always feel that way at the time, did it? Sometimes along the way, it hurt. Sometimes it felt like our hearts were breaking. Sometimes it felt like a part of us was dying. I wish someone had told me sooner that the key to living was learning how to die. To die well, not just at the end of life, but all along the way. I think it might have saved me from some suffering through the years. So if life is a process of dying over and over again, then how are we to understand this thing called death? Maybe, as I say, death isn't the stranger we thought it was. Maybe it isn't the great unknown. Maybe we've already been learning the skills it will take to navigate our own death with grace and dignity. Maybe we haven't given ourselves credit for all the wisdom we've gathered along the way because we've been learning, right, as we've been going. We've been learning how to let go. We've been learning how to say goodbye. We've been learning how to grieve and mourn, learning how to welcome change, learning that the self we thought was fixed is in fact fluid and impermanent. And we've been learning to make our peace with that. Perhaps most importantly, we've been learning to trust that when something dies, it's almost always so that something new and beautiful can take its place. I guess what I'm saying is that maybe in the end, death won't feel like the opposite of life to us, but just one more step in a lifelong process of dying and being reborn. This way of understanding life as a constant process of death and change, it hasn't made me unafraid, but it has made me less afraid. And that's something. I'd like to close with a story. A few weeks ago, I shared with you that my former congregation in Washington, D.C. has enjoyed a long relationship with a school in Hiroshima, Japan, that was decimated by the U.S. atomic bombing in 1945. On several occasions, I've had the honor of being a guest of the school at the commemoration of the anniversary of the bombing. Now, the atomic bomb detonated over Hiroshima at 8:16 in the morning on August 6th, just as students were arriving for class. Over 400 children died at the school that morning. Every year, the school holds a memorial service attended by the descendants of the deceased and by current students and their families and neighbors and city dignitaries. The ceremony is simple and solemn. It includes silence and prayer and the laying of flowers on a stone altar. All of this I would have expected. It's what happened next that surprised me. Because within an hour of the service, the schoolyard is transformed. Solemnity gives way to festivity. You see, the Japanese have a long tradition of honoring the dead by dancing for them. The tradition is called Obon, O-B-O-N, and is said to date back to the Buddhist monk who once danced for the soul of his mother. When he realized that she was at peace, and he was so happy that he danced. And so all at once, the mournful silence of the school was transformed. The band starts playing. The beer starts flowing. The Japanese like beer. The children jump and shout with balloons and toys. And one by one, the elderly women dressed in beautiful kimonos create a circle and lead the dance, teaching the steps to the younger generation. Even the American, on this day of all days, is invited to loosen his tie and join the dance. Every year, I'm struck by how quickly mourning is followed by rejoicing, how tears resolve into dancing. It reminds me of the New Orleans tradition of the second line, where after a funeral service, mourners will pour out of the church and parade through the streets of the lower Ninth Ward with brass bands playing and drinking and singing when the saints go marching in, right? It feels to me like there's great wisdom in these traditions of dancing with death, the pairing of grief with joy. It makes me realize, friends, that if we are to dance in this life, we must first learn to dance with death, with our own death. And that's my prayer for us on this All Souls Sunday. Amen.